So I want to welcome you all to this presentation, and I am sharing my screen now, and I'm going to start the slideshow. So here is the information about this is my email. And so what I wanted to share that with you, and you'll see it at the end of the PowerPoint as well, I need you to email me for me to know whether you want a certificate of completion, that you've actually been through this training. I'll give you a copy of the PowerPoint. And I am going to be sharing some documents in this presentation as well. And you're welcome to anything that you see and asking me for anything as well. So in that emails I'll send to you, I will talk about where you could go to actually watch these videos again. So it's very simple, Janet at attainmentcompany.com. It's Janet at. So go to that email. So I want to tell you, why do I know how to do all this stuff? So I do like to share just quickly. I was a special ed teacher. I placed students in jobs. This is back in the 70s and 80s. I started to support an employment program in 1983. And so during some of the times that I was doing job placement, we were in recession times. So I understand that even as we get students and adults with disabilities back into jobs, there are still going to be some challenges with that. I did go back to school to be a registered nurse, partly because some of the people I was supporting needed a lot of health care. We had a man on a ventilator that actually we were placed in a job. And so I thought, well, I think I'll go get my degree as a nurse. And so I could be a job coach too. So I have a lot of experience also in personal care services. So I ran an agency that placed adults with disabilities in jobs and students, and then also how to provide personal care for them both in the community and the workplace as well as at home to get them off for school or work. And then I worked at the Department of Health Services for a while, their employment initiatives section chief. I've been training all over, so I do really love doing this. I'm so happy I can share with you. And then right now, just the last couple of years, I started working at Attainment Company. It's kind of a culmination of all my experience and really looking at developing curriculum. I developed pre-employment transition services, or PREAT solution. And then I love doing this training. So what we're going to talk about today specifically is why we use systematic instruction. We already know systematic instruction is a part of what you do both in a classroom setting, anytime you're teaching specific skills, but I used it very specifically in work settings. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about using systematic instruction, or what we would call job coaching or training. And that really is about how you help students and adults who have any kind of challenges in learning that job task, how you break those down into steps. And we're going to give you a lot of tips on how to support students in the community in jobs. So really it's talking about a specific order of how you do this, and we're going to talk about how you put these together in what kind of prompts you'll use in queuing. So there really is kind of a difference between teaching and job coaching, although job coaches teach and teachers coach. So, but I want to explain the difference. So when you're teaching, here you're learning brand new skills. So you're learning real new job skills. It's very individualized for that student and their specific learning styles. And the whole idea is here that they can perform a new task, a new job. Coaching, it becomes coaching when you're actually, the skills are there, but you're improving those skills. Or maybe you're coaching on other techniques, for example, social skills or the soft skills needed to be successful in a job. So the coaching comes when you've started teaching the task, that's a task analysis, but it doesn't stop there. And I just really want to express the importance of that, because we really have to talk about how to self-monitor. How does the worker self-monitor and if they're doing well or not, and how do they interact with the people that they're working with in those job sites? So when we think about what makes a really good trainer, sometimes they're called employment specialists, sometimes they're the paraprofessionals going in, they're job coaches, they're job trainers, there's all sorts of titles given, but in the end, you're teaching skills so a person can do a job. The worker can do the job successfully for the employer. So really so important that they have some flexibility, that they can adapt quickly. They have to be a good problem solver. And sometimes it's really teaching those skills for the person that's providing those supports. Good interpersonal skills. You have to know how to talk to people, not only the person that you're the worker, you have to know how to interact with that person, but also their coworkers and the employer and the supervisors. So really knowing how to organize this in the training process. And I'm going to tell you some great tips on this. And then being responsive to changes. A workplace is not a classroom. It is not a social service agency. They are a business. And so we look at how do you integrate into a business setting, both you as the trainer, but how do you teach the worker how to do well in those settings? So being responsive to change is really important, and being that communicator. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the importance of that communication as well. So it's the job coach role, and again, I'm going to use these words interchangeably, job coach, job trainer. Really, you have to know the worker. The worker could be a student, the worker can be an adult with a disability, but you have to know the worker and how do they learn well? What are some accommodations they might need in the work setting? And most employers all employers are required, according to ADA, to provide accommodations as long as they are affordable and reasonable, and as long as the worker can actually perform the job task. But we know that a lot of those job tasks need time for training. And so we have to help build those skills. And sometimes there might be habits, and I call them idiosyncrasies. Sometimes I just call what sometimes our students, if they can go and find a job on their own and learn the job on their own, they didn't need you. So that these are going to be a subset of students that need extra support to figure out how to talk to an employer, how to get a job, and then how to learn the job. So the big thing here is, are there things that they do that draw attention to them? So these are going to be what we're going to look at and talk about when we're talking about the importance of being successful in the job. It's not always the job skills, but it's also all those soft skills and social skills as well. So you have to know the business. What is the business's expectations? Who's the supervisor? Who are the coworkers? And what's that work culture? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And now the job description. So this is where we have those task analysis, the breakdown, the work tasks, the quality and quantity of work the employer expects. And this is where we're going to be able to assess that. So as we know, we're going to be conducting a task analysis. I'm going to explain how to do that. We're going to be putting those in a list. We're going to create assignments. Maybe each day things are done differently. We're going to create this how-to directions, how to actually do those jobs and those individual tasks. And then how can we really help that worker be independent in the job? In the end, that's the important final goal here, is that worker can be as independent as they are able in that work setting. And then the really important part of this is cultivating those relationships. Cultivating the relationships with the worker, with the coworkers, the supervisor, the work culture, the place of business, because that's really building that what we call natural supports, but building the support that already exists for everybody else in that work setting. But that the student or the adult with a disability, they're going to have some potentially, not always, some additional support needs. And so we have to look at how to cultivate that within the work setting. So here's the supervisor. So we have responsibilities for each group of people that are in this work setting. And so really having being good communication about this, identifying and allocating what tasks is the supervisor going to do, but they tell the worker what it is that they're going to be doing. The supervisor may adapt job assignments based on the skills of the worker. They may provide additional training or all the training. The job coach may be just providing extra coaching. But typically, the job coach is providing some significant training as well. They will approve if there's going to be any schedule changes, time off. They are the ones who we want them to be the supervisor to give feedback. I've had many times where they go, well, I can't tell them they're not doing a good job. I don't want to hurt their feelings. And we go, no, it's really important that they know this. And then also just looking at responding to any concerns that you may have. They're the person that you're going to go to, the go-to person. Now, the coworker responsibilities, really, we look at who's working with this individual. And you may not actually call them responsibilities, but they're the people that we're going to go out to look at how we can cultivate those relationships. We want to learn from them. they've been doing this job for a while. What are some efficiencies they found that works well? What tips do they have that they can teach? And sometimes they may be part of the training of that worker, and then also providing feedback. Well, you know, this is how it has to look when that product is done, or this is how how we have to respond to our customers. There are also a great deal of moral support. Who do we talk to at the work sites? It's our coworkers. And so we have to help build some of those relationships. It doesn't always come naturally, and it doesn't always happen just without some small ways to build those relationships. So that's where your worker's going to get some moral support. And then just explaining what you're doing there, because sometimes coworkers are going, what? Why is this person following this worker? I don't get it. What's their role? So really helping to understand that. And then maybe there might be some modifications. Maybe they need to help out to get that job done, as they would help any employee to get that job done. In the dishwashing area, when the dishes are coming in during the lunch rush, everybody's getting that work done because they need new dishes to put out for the new customers. So I'm just learning about some of those workflow. The coworker is the one that really knows that well. And then the responsibilities of the job coach and the job trainer. I am going to just make this, I was trying to find a way here. I was trying to find a way to look at the chat to see if anybody's having any questions. There, okay, I got it up. All right. Responsibilities of the job trainer is really obvious. They're the ones that are individualized. They provide task analysis, appropriate prompts. They're the ones that I'm going to show and explain further how we do systematic instruction in a work setting. And I'm going to explain each of these. Like, they're going to be the ones providing it, maybe doing modeling. They'll be doing potentially verbal cues and direct cues. We're going to talk about all of this in your role as a job trainer. So how do coworkers, the workplace culture. Here also are some questions. I'm giving you all of this prior to actually getting into the systematic instruction, because truly this is all so important when you're supporting the worker in those work settings. You can teach the work skills. Of course, that's important. But the other piece of this is helping that student feel part of that work setting, helping that person with a disability feel like they're going to be developing relationships, maybe friendships with people in that work setting. So the work culture, how are people interacting throughout the day? How is this working? Do people talk much with each other during the day? Is it people working in their own areas? Is it appropriate to have your cell phone in the work area? And this is really critical to teach, especially our young people, when is it appropriate to pull out a cell phone? When is it appropriate to use it? When is it not appropriate to use it? So, and then when can breaks do? And then even your volume of voice, if you're working in an office setting and talking loudly, that already is breaking social norms. And so we have to help explain what those social norms are to be successful in that job. Dress code, please make sure that you understand, you as the job coach, but also the worker understands what the dress code is for that particular work setting. It can be, and it can vary. Some people are dressed in, white shirts and suits, but some people, and some it's casual, but you have to see and blend into those work settings. Sometimes there's uniforms. So really helping that student understand the importance. And of course, with dress code goes hygiene. So really understanding what are the clear expectations of the employer about what you wear to work each day, whether you can use your cell phone each day, what kind of social interactions can go on each day. As we know, many people lose their jobs because they're talking too much to people in the work area, knocking on doors and coming into rooms that meetings going on. Those basic social norms have to be explained often and very, very clearly explained what is okay and what isn't. How do you even get in and out of the building? Sometimes you have to go through security. Some places they have requirements as far as, you know, swiping cards. So both the worker, they'll have their own identification cards, but as a job coach, you may have to talk to the employer about what you need in order to get in and out of the building when you're providing job support. And here is so important, your approach. Of course, you're respectful people, but one of the important things that I really stress for the job coaches when I was training them is the importance of being age appropriate, especially when they're working with workers that have intellectual or developmental disabilities. Quite often there's going to be a different language used, and I don't mean, you know, Spanish language, I mean the verbs or the words we're using. So I get that we want to make sure a person understands the words we're using. We're not going to use lofty words, but we also need to make sure we're talking to that person as an adult to adult, not adult to child. And so it's really, or parent to child. It's not that, it never will be that. We need to make sure we're talking on an even footing for adult to adult. And never, ever, ever use human service or educational jargon. No one in that work setting knows that you're talking about IEP goals, or you're going to be talking about VR, vocational rehabilitation, or what is CP, IGD, OJTs on the job trainings, OCD. You know, I mean, we use so many acronyms in our social services and educational field, even in the medical world as a registered nurse, we use so many. Get rid of all of that. Coworkers don't know what that means. Supervisors don't know what, and employers don't, and they don't care. There's no reason to use those acronyms. Now, if you're going to develop some adaptations, and we're going to use some examples of what are some good adaptations to use in work settings, and I'm going to give you some ideas. We always make sure that they're blending in, that they're not standing out, that whatever that worker needs in order to be an accommodation to do that job more independently, we want it to blend in as much as possible. And so this is a business that's hired or offered experience for a student or adult with disability. And the expectation is that the job will be completed. It is a business. And I really focus on, we didn't always go into this field because we wanted to work in business. We would have gone to get an MBA for that. But we're in the world of employment and business whenever we're talking about work experiences, work supports, transition for students, pre-employment transition services, all of that is in the business world. And so we need to talk business talk and use the terminology that's used in those companies. One last thing I'd like to say, there's two things here, and then we'll get into some of the systematic instruction. And one is, always please use people first language. And if you don't really know what that is, read that article from Kathy Snow. It's not, we don't want to identify people about their disability. We want to say the person first and their disability second. We want to know that people are people first, and it's perceptions. So employers and coworkers are going to have perceptions. They're going to have stereotypes. And so we want to figure out ways to help that person get to know the coworkers, to know the individual and see beyond their disability. And then HIPAA. So I think every job site practically I've ever been at, people are always saying, you know, I've done it, I've worked in work settings for like 25, 30 years with students or adults with disabilities. And often they're going to ask questions, and they go, well, how did they get this way? Or what happened to them? Or are they taking any medications? Do they have seizures? Are they going to fall on the floor? They ask lots of questions, not typically because of any bad reason. They're just curious, and we need to help educate them. So in the end, it is our job to really help educate people on what it is, what HIPAA means. Not saying, well, you know, according to HIPAA, we're not supposed to tell you anything. And it's not like that. That's the rude way to help a person understand and go, no, thank you for your interest in Mary. You know, that's information I really can't share. It's private. Just like you would not want people to tell others about yourself, right? You know, or thank you. I need to protect Mary's privacy. And that's something I can't share. Or, you know, if you'd like to get to know Mary, let's go and I'll introduce you to Mary and you can talk with her. So find it as a teaching moment. That's what I look at it as a teaching moment. Now, there are a few people that are going to ask specifically because they want to know if that person's carrying any kind of medications or any kind of opioids or anything like that. And trust me, some of that is an issue out there. And so you want to be really careful that if the worker does have to bring medications to the work setting, that they're very protected, they're locked, that nobody else is aware of what it is that that person's taking. That's pretty important. Now for seizures, you're going to have a conversation with the worker. And if this person does have seizures that can happen at the workplace, it is important that other people know how to protect them. And for that person to know and be able to say, if I have a seizure, this is what we would want to happen. Don't call 911 unless you see blood and unless you feel like I've hurt myself, of course. But we want to have a conversation about what does a seizure mean and what will the person need after a seizure. Will they need to rest for a while? Will we need to have a change of clothing because they had lost bladder control? So there are things that maybe you could explain, but you know, kind of demystify it and help the coworkers understand, you know, if this happens, here's what we would ask if you would do. And so, and I'll just use Mary as an example, have Mary be able to say to the people, this is what I need for help. Thank you, everybody. So now we're going to get into this systematic instruction. And so when we're talking about systematic instruction, I want to talk specifically about task analysis, and we're going to go through a lot of materials here. So here's task analysis. So really it's identifying where we're going to need additional training for that worker. So, and then tracking this progress. And here was just an example of one that shows what the job trainer writes in and what the person was able to do. But I'm going to show you a form, and I will send it to you if you're interested in it, a way to track a task analysis and how to track the prompts and cues that you're using. So the benefits of putting this together, it's outstanding benefits because you're not going to overteach or over-support the worker. What happens so often is the job coach feels like, you know, I should be doing something, and we use verbal instruction so much. And if we use it when the student or the worker doesn't even need it, we're overusing our prompts. And so we're going to show you how this works. So it really is developing a plan of action, writing out the task, and it might be individual jobs have individual task analysis. That's very likely. Because each job that they're doing, each task in their job requires their own task analysis, or it might not be. And those task analysis are changing all the time because as the worker becomes independent, now okay, we don't even need a task analysis for this job. And now we're finding the spots, and I'll show you. So it's really tracking this progress. And then it provides a record for other trainers. And also it's going to show where were the areas where this worker really struggled learning these jobs, learning that particular within that task. And then now when we place them in another job, maybe this is just a work experience and they're not going to be working there permanently. We've learned a lot from that process of where are the areas that worker is going to struggle and typically, and where might we want to focus our energies in doing additional training. So what prompts? So there's a hierarchy of prompts to use when you're doing a task analysis. What level of prompt you use does matter because we will overuse prompts that aren't needed, and we need to look at going farther up that hierarchy. So it is the nuts and bolts of teaching a task. And so what I always say is your job when you're training somebody in a job in the community is for that worker to be as independent as possible. So you have done your job well, the more independence you can show that worker has been doing. And it also is a way to show if you're getting funding for job coaching, it'll be a way to show, okay, this is where we're getting, this is the improvement we made from last week with independence. And then also most voc rehab agencies, vocational rehabilitation wants to see your fading plan and how you're doing with your systematic instruction. So the less prompting, the more independent, and that's a good thing. So now we're going to talk about, okay, we're going to do a job analysis. We're going in, we're going to see what the work is. The employer is saying, yes, the worker has gone through the interview. We're ready to get started. So you're going to get a tour with the worker, and then you're going to be writing down, what's the work environment? What are things I'm seeing? How are they going to get in and out of the building? Where are they going to store? Is there even a refrigerator or a microwave in this work setting? Where would they store food if they're going to have a break or lunch? And then what kind of equipment might they need in order to do this job? Are they going to need equipment at all? And the employer will provide that. And then what are the tasks that the employer is expecting this worker to do? So now I'm going to look at, okay, now where are places that somebody else may be a cue for them, not me? Who can they ask for additional supplies instead of me asking? So now you're already starting to build in what are some already cues and support that might be available in that work setting. You want to get a job descriptions. Most often, especially as people are coming into entry-level jobs, there might be a job description, but there might not be because you've customized a job description. And I'll talk about that again. So you want to look at, maybe you might do the job. You don't have to. This isn't always appropriate. It really depends on the work setting because they may not want you to touch anything because you're not an employee of theirs, a liability. But sometimes it's helpful just to do the job to see what it takes to complete that task and to write up the sequence or to observe a skilled person doing that job. And now we're going to put together our task analysis. So here's the hierarchy of prompting. Now, online, I looked at this, I was putting this together years ago, actually, and even just this last year I was looking, and these hierarchies change. So I see that some people put them in different orders. I'm going to tell you why I put it in this order, again, just based on my experiences. But it's not, it's not cut and dry. We can't, this isn't the absolute one. So if you've used a different prompt hierarchy, it's okay. But basically, the idea is we're going from, the dark red is we're going from a very significant amount of prompting, which is actually your physical prompt. You're actually assisting that person to do the job physically. And then you go to partial physical. Maybe you're just patting their shoulder or taking their hand or guiding that person. Modeling is probably the biggest one we use. We show them how to do the job, or a coworker shows them how to do the job, and then the worker does it. So modeling is used a lot in training, all job tasks. Gestures is the next level because now I'm just going to be pointing. Okay, now maybe I'll give you examples. So I've had a person have to they worked in a banquet room in a hotel. And one of the things they're doing is they do banquet setup, but afterwards, then they have to vacuum this huge banquet room. And vacuuming a big room, you have to break it up into parts and pieces. So I would use gestures and not use any verbal prompts. I would use gestures to kind of look at helping to guide that worker on where they need to go. But gestures and verbal prompt almost could be, one or the other as far as the sequencing, because a verbal prompt is probably the 90% of what we do. Now go pick up the item. Now you need to go out to the customers. Now you need to go and clear that table. Now you need to finish this. We use verbal instructions all the time. And they're usually what I call direct verbal prompts. But can I just say, what we use so much less is indirect verbal prompts. What do you need to do next? Where do you need to go next? Does that look correct? Do you think you've done that correctly? So asking questions with indirect verbal prompts helps that worker think about what they've just done, or to think about what is it that I need to do next. And the idea here is, again, that self-monitoring, building the self-monitoring in with that for those workers to have a full understanding of what it is that they need to do and what should they be doing next. Use indirect as much as you can. That it's so much better. Now, visual prompts, some people put this farther down, but I found this is how we actually fade from work settings, is using visual prompts. So basically, those are pictorial. I have the workers have a pictorial schedule, and quite often then once they see their schedule or the steps in that particular job, we take pictures of each step. Sometimes when in the picture, I even put an arrow to point out what in that picture they need to be sure they're doing or checking or looking for. And so those visual prompts, employers all over the country are using this all the time. If you work at any place like Pizza Hut, they have the pictures of what those pizzas should look like when they're completed. So visual cueing is really a great way to start building that dependence on the verbal prompt from the job coach to sometimes none, zero. Then we have what we call natural cue or independence. So this is where somebody, they look in the, I'll use the bussing tables again. You're looking in the room, I see customers are leaving. That's a natural cue for the worker to know it's time to go and bus that table. So something comes down your way, that's a natural cue to know now you need to manipulate whatever it is that's been given to you. You have a customer asking you a question. Again, that's a natural cue. So those are things that are already built into that work setting that everybody uses in order to tell them what I need to do next. So this is the hierarchy. And you don't want to be providing modeling or even verbal prompts when you don't need it. So you want to make sure, this is the hardest part, it was for me, because obviously I love talking, to be in a work setting and not give a verbal prompt when you see that worker struggling. But the struggle is the problem solving that's going on and making them cognitively problem solve, what is it that I'm missing or what do I need to do next? Don't immediately give the verbal cue. Wait. Now you may still have to, but start with the indirect verbal cue. What do you think is next? What do you think you need to do? I don't know. And then maybe you'll go into the verbal cue, or maybe the visual cue. You point at the pictures of their schedule and go, well, where are you on this schedule? And they go, I'm right here. Well, what do you think is next? Yeah, there's my next picture. So these are the ways that we look at in teaching and training skills to work their way up towards independence. Here is actually the definitions of each of those cues. And so when you get a copy of the PowerPoint, when you email me at janet@attainmentcompany.com, and I'll have that at the end, you'll be able to see the actual training strategies. So here's the form that I'm happy to share with you. So I write it in here, and I actually put the prompts, I do abbreviations. So there's the physical, there's the direct verbal, indirect verbal, the visual, gesture, modeling, shadowing. So I didn't talk much about shadowing. So these are the steps of the task. Are they independent or not at each of those steps, plus or minus? What instructional strategy or prompt did you use? And do you think you might need some adaptation, like a pictorial schedule? Is there something, or maybe we need to tape down the ruler. We had a young man who had to, he measured Velcro pieces and then he had to cut them to size. And actually his coworker said, well, you could just tape that ruler on his table and then he could just easily do that. And actually other people said, well, that is a lot easier than what I was doing. So looking at what might be just simple adaptations or accommodations, nothing that even cost any money. So thinking about how that we could have that step. So I'm using an example of making a cheese sandwich. So if you think about what it takes to make cheese sandwiches, and actually I did actually train on this because I had a gentleman that worked in the kitchen of a large nursing home. And so he had to make, you know, hundreds of sandwiches, whatever it was, peanut butter, cheese, you know, different things. And so we broke down that task into steps. So when I do this training in person, I actually go through this, but so, well, I guess this is in person, but I'm not pulling out a cheese sandwich right now. So, but one of the things we do is, I've always felt modeling is not a higher level. Modeling is simply an accepted teaching method for all students. As a matter of fact, all my instruction has not included modeling as a prompt. It is an introductory step of teaching. Yeah, so so modeling, we do a lot of modeling, and I agree, I just was reading, and that is true. But modeling then, and sometimes we do it with verbal and not verbal, but the idea is that you want to fade from that, because the idea is you want to move up to more independence. So you would be, of course, initially teaching a new skill, but now we're talking about the process of fading. So in teaching a new skill, you're going to use potentially all of those prompts. But now we're saying, now how do you build those skills so you're not needing those prompts? So looking at this, I looked at, okay, so was I able to gather my supplies? Yep, plus, I could. But the one in parentheses says, well, I could pull out 2 slices of bread, but I had struggle opening the bread bag. So I probably don't need an instructional strategy for this. And maybe modeling would have been something I would have done initially. But now they're still struggling getting that bag open. So is there something else? They can get it open, but is it taking too much time needed to get those tasks done for that employer? So thinking about what would be a more efficient way of doing that. And in this case, because he was making so many sandwiches, you use the scissors and cut that bag open, and now he didn't have to worry about getting that twist tie, which twist ties are terrible, teach how to put them on and off. Or even using a clip. So we thought about different ways to help him when he was making his sandwiches. So could I lay the slices yep, I did that independently. Don't need modeling anymore for that. I don't need any verbal cues. Don't say anything to me in that step. Now I'm gonna open up that butter container. I gotta spread some butter. I don't know if you've ever taught someone how to spread any kind of butter or anything on bread. There is a pressure point that's needed, and it's got to be just the right pressure and not too much pressure. So in this case, we used modeling. We had the P was actual physical. I actually helped him feel how the pressure by my hand over his hand, and of course I always say, I'm going to put my hand over your hand, and is that okay? I'm going to show you the pressure you need to spread this butter. And then we had a direct verbal cue. Now you need to spread it to all edges of the bread, and the verbal cue or the visual. So here's what the sandwich should look like when you're done. Now, what were some ways that we could do that more efficiently? So we thought about what needed adaptations. Well, how about getting the butter softened? So in the end, we actually got a brush, like a pastry brush that didn't scratch up the bread. And then we had the butter softened in the microwave, very few seconds, but then he could just easily spread that bread with lots of, I mean, he had lots to make, of course. So that was an easy, quick accommodation that actually made the job more efficient. So again, if I can do it, yes, but maybe there were some, I had trouble pulling the cheese off. So we were doing a cheese sandwich and there's a big block of cheese that's already been sliced and I have to pull that off. Maybe dexterity wise, that was a struggle for him. So is there any way I could do that more efficiently? Is there some tool that would help me do that more efficiently? Would be just having the glove be able to do. So thinking about, I can do it, but it takes too much time again. And then laying things out evenly on the bread, modeling would be a thing that we could use. I would gesture, know that cheese has to be just right. Trust me on this. There's absolutely a quality control for people that are going to be eating this food. So I actually showed a pictorial representation of what that needs to look like. And then, so I didn't have it. So you see I have a minus on a couple of those. And then the bottom was like being able to actually cut something in half. So this was a challenge for him to understand the half. So in cutting it in half, we actually had a little plastic grid made of like a, I don't know what you call it, like, and being able to put the round part of the bread together, put it in this mold, and then he would slice down the middle. And it really was an efficient way to slice that bread quickly and efficiently. Now, see what I've put here. I have pluses and minuses. Once the pluses were either accommodated, or maybe I do more teaching on those, which might be maybe forget the idea of something the bread goes into. I keep teaching what a half looks like. But how much time do I have to teach that skill is also a consideration. Now, once these pluses and minuses are clearly laid out, you should never do any teaching or prompting on the pluses of those steps. And so that's the backing off place. That's what we call fading. That's the time you're going to back off and say, I'm only going to intervene at number 4 when they're struggling with that. And actually, we've decided to accommodate that. I've talked to the employer. Now it's a plus. Laying out those slices, we figured out how to either teach it, or I've decided to accommodate it, and then I can change that to a plus. So now just making, this is just one step in a big job that Barry had, but you're thinking about how you break this down, where you're going to put your interventions, and more importantly, it makes you think about what prompt or instructional strategy am I going to use in initially teaching it, but in the fading process, the ongoing teaching, or now we call coaching. And then how can I figure out a more efficient way for that worker to do that job? This is sort of, I have to say, this is the fun stuff about when we're providing training and job supports, is really being creative and looking at ways that the worker can do this job with as minimal amount of coaching as is needed. Here was just a job analysis of a hotel room. They worked out 1 through 10, what they have to do. And this could be a pictorial schedule. It could be a written schedule if the person is able to read the words. Then how are you going to be tracking and monitoring how they're doing? Which prompt are you using? And then on the right, we're looking at which, for each time you were in there, was it correct? Did you have to prompt? Which one did you use? This is just for data collection codes. But more importantly, if we don't start teaching self-monitoring, there's going to be a reliance on you, the teacher or the job coach or the trainer. They're going to look to you or to a coworker, and it might be too much. We want that person, that worker, to really be able to know how to monitor their own work as much as they're able. So we have to have them, do they know what is the right way to do that particular task? Are they clear about what's correct and not correct? So it's almost like example, non-example as a teaching tool. We hate showing non-examples, but in this case, maybe it would be important for them to see, here's a sandwich that was not cut in half, the cheese isn't uneven, and here's an example of what is and how it should look. And so what is the target behavior? Now, how is this reinforcing? Well, the reinforcement might be that I'm going to get paid today. Maybe a coworker is going to come over and check my work, and then I'm going to get praise, or I'm going to get feedback. And what are the person's own reinforcers to really do that job well? And then what could we do for them to check? And maybe they're going to do different things. They might have checkoff lists. They might have, and I'll give you some more technology type ways to check on what they're doing. So whatever it is, helping that worker know what it is for them on how to self-manage and recognize that. Okay, I'm gonna go through this. So here's some self-monitoring, and I wanna get through this. So you might have a checklist on a smartphone or iPad, assuming that the worker has that, and they don't always, and so it might be a paper and pencil task. Maybe they watch a short video. Again, talking to the employer, you need to get permission for these things, but it's like, here's a video of how that job needs to be done. I'm gonna watch that, and then I'm gonna do it. It's modeling, but it's modeling without anybody there. They can do this self-direction. and then be able to check the quality. We talked about using charts. Maybe they text their job coach when the task is completed, and now the job coach can see that that job was done. Maybe they send them a photo. And then recording, maybe they use a stopwatch to see how long that task took them. They mark the time, and then they went, I want to beat that time. I'm going to do it faster tomorrow. And so having that as a motivator for that person. So whenever you're starting a job and teaching tasks in a job, you want to know, first thing, when someone starts it, what is your role in that teaching? And then is there an exit plan? Is there a plan of how you're going to fade those supports, those pluses, those minuses, those instructional strategies? Are you going to move those prompts up to being independent? And then what are some adaptations that might help that worker be that independent? So when you're doing remote support, we often talk about, there's a face-to-face training, but is there an opportunity to do FaceTime? Again, assuming a worker has these, to be able to do FaceTime. Doesn't have to be iPhones. You can do it now with all different apps. Maybe they text. Is there a video or a picture they can show? I finished my work, I'm moving on. Maybe they actually say, I'm checking in now, I'm done with my shift, or I'm done with that task. And the coach now can talk to that worker from a remote. And it's well worth it. And it might even be worth having some like burner phones for workers to be able to use as they're learning a task, because sending a job coach to that worksite is expensive. And so thinking about the cost of that versus the cost of more remote support where a job coach can support multiple people. We provided supports in rural areas. And so even driving to that community took a half hour, 45 minutes, an hour sometimes to get to those communities. So using remote supports was really practical and cost efficient for us. So there also are some pretty cool apps that you can get to create checklists. Here was one that listed 10 of them and different types of apps. If you have a cool app you're using, I would love to know what that is so I can share with people as well. When you're putting together your task analysis, do you use an app for that? Are you using anything in particular for doing any remote support of your students and adults with disabilities? Let me know if you're doing apps for travel training, any task sequencing. There is an amazing amount of technology out there, so if there's something you know about or use, I'd love to know. So really it's talking about providing ample opportunities for interaction with the co-workers and the worker. This is so critical towards that independence, but also those social skills and building those social relationships. And we really want people not to see they have a disability, of course they do, but we want the co-workers to know the individual personally. And I think I said this on Wednesday, that now that we have more inclusive education, I started to see supervisors and workers are used to being with people, students with disabilities. And so even with more significant disabilities. And so now supervising somebody in their work setting with a disability comes natural. And I love that. I just feel like inclusive education has come so far in really building that workforce of full acceptance and not stereotyping people. Always I talk about building these friendships and networks. And if you have any marketing materials that you use to give to employers, make sure that it always shows the student or the adults that you work with finding jobs, and have them looking competent, have them looking in business settings, take pictures of them in business settings. We want to promote that employers actually, it's a cost benefit for having people hired or giving work experiences for students. So ongoing support is also really critical, maintaining that connection. Maybe there's opportunities to learn new jobs. It's interesting that even to find pictures on the internet that show people with disabilities working competently, as this one does in a work setting, they're tough to find. And often you see some of the same pictures because of that. And we need to build this library of, yes, there are hundreds of thousands of people working across the country in jobs who happen to have a disability. So it's not always in a wheelchair either. So we really want people to see that and to really understand that and transition. And as they're transitioning from school into the adult world, jobs is just one piece of it. So I kind of said in the bottom, don't forget about a meaningful day, that people might want to still have opportunities to volunteer, opportunities to learn additional, like having additional training, education, taking classes, having physical fitness, having a day that includes all of that. Especially for people with disabilities after 18, there may be some restrictions on income due to benefits. So here's some videos of students on the job I wanted to share with you, because I thought it's great to show parents of workers who have disabilities in jobs. And so these are some great ones. And then creating a path to employment is from the Department of Labor. Future planning for teens with disabilities. This is focused specifically on teens. It's called Explore Work. It's a fantastic newer website that helps teens look at their future, especially around employment. And here are some more resources. In Wisconsin, we have this free training, and it's for those early childhood and like children's long-term care system. And it really looks at that group of parents and teachers and providers of having a goal and expectation of employment. And this is kind of a new thing. So this is wonderful. Let's Get to Work is a fantastic resource for schools. In a lot of ideas of resources for really making connections to employers and businesses. I have a couple of the websites that have PDFs about job coaching as well. So here's my information. It's janet@attainmentcompany.com. And I want you all to feel free to email me. I can send you a certificate of participation. I can send you this PowerPoint, and I will make a link for the actual video if you want that to show other coworkers. So I really want this to be a resource for you as you work with students and adults with disabilities in jobs in the community. So thank you all so much for participating. I so appreciate the time that we spent together, and really be safe and have a good weekend, Easter weekend. Thank you so much.